Hey everybody, good news. This is probably the last lecture that I'll be giving you that has to do with grammar. After this one, we're moving on to bigger and better ideas, larger structure, writing, things like that. It's about commas again. Now remember the last lecture had to do with fixing run-ons, when you have two sentences smashed together, and we talked about 3 different ways to correct that error. We're going to talk about another way of using commas today. Last time I told you that when you're using fanboys and putting commas with those fanboys, those are most of the errors, most of the comma errors that people make. I think I said 80% of the comma errors you make probably have to do with your use of those fanboys, those conjunctions. Today we're going to talk about the other 20%, okay? It's still a big idea. It's still a way of using commas that people get wrong a lot. And I know I keep saying this, but even professional writers make this mistake. You're going to see it in professional writing, articles and columns and things like that, and novels and everything else, but that doesn't mean it's right, okay? So we're going to talk about this other way that commas can be misused, and it's really kind of an interesting thing. This is going to be a very brief lecture. It's very quick, very unlike the last one I gave you. And so let's get into it and see how this goes. All right, so as I said, we're still talking about commas and how to use them. First, a little bit of review. This is what we talked about last time. Remember, we talked about how there were 3 rules that every sentence, every college level sentence, must obey in order to be considered a complete sentence. And those rules were that it has to have a subject, it has to have a verb, and it has to be a complete idea. So, for example, this is a sentence that we've already seen. The dog barked. And we decided that that was a complete sentence because it's got a subject, it's got a verb, and it is a complete idea. Yes, it's a short sentence, but that's not what makes it a complete idea or not a complete idea. It doesn't matter how long the sentence is. It's all what's going on inside that sentence, okay? That idea of the complete idea, number 3, we're going to focus on a little bit today. This is the different way of using commas, and it has to do with that idea of, is it a complete idea? Now, it centers around this word and words like this word. Again, I'm going to see if I can demystify something. If you were in class right now, I would put out the following question. Hey, how many of you guys have ever heard or been told, maybe by a teacher, that you should never start a sentence with because? And surprisingly, most people will raise their hands. Now, here's the demystifying part. That is complete bullcrap, okay? You absolutely can start a sentence with because. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I encourage you to do it because it leads to really neat-looking sentences. However, it can lead you into trouble. If you start a sentence with because, it's turning it into a complex sentence, okay? We're going to talk about what that is, a complex sentence. Because can steer you the wrong way, and because of that, some teachers will just say, just don't use it. If you don't use it, you won't get into trouble. But that is not the philosophy of our class. I want you to use it. I want you to try new things. I want you to get into trouble, right? Because when you do something, if you do it wrong, so what? It just means the next time, maybe you'll do it right. Now, here's why it's a problem. It's because of sentences like this. Now look at that sentence. Because it was raining. Is that a complete sentence? Well, it does have a subject, and it does have a verb. It is the subject, was raining is the verb. But is it a complete idea? We're talking about rule number 3 now. And here's the thing. Because of the word because, it's not a complete sentence. If I were to get rid of the word because, and we just had it was raining, would you agree that that's a complete sentence? Yeah, it is. There's your subject, there's your verb, and it is a complete idea. If somebody said, what was the weather like yesterday? And I said, it was raining. I fully answered that question. Grammatically, it's perfect. I don't have to give any more information. That word because messed up everything. If I just said it was raining, it would have been fine. And if you say because it was raining, now you got a problem. And so that's why teachers will say, just don't use because. So the word because
can be called a dependent word, which means it depends on something else. It needs something else, right? When you were a kid and you were living at home and somebody was taking care of you, maybe you were at home with your parents, you depended on them and you were considered a dependent because you needed them for food and clothing and shelter. And that made you dependent on them in order to be alive, in order to exist. That's kind of what's happening in this sentence. The word because is a dependent word. And because of that, it's turning this whole sentence into a dependent clause. Remember, a clause is a group of words that contain a subject and a verb. It doesn't have to be complete. It just has a subject and a verb. So that clause, it was raining, is now a dependent clause because of that word, okay? That word made the whole thing entirely dependent. It means it depends. It needs something else in order to exist. Right now, that sentence cannot exist on its own as it is. Now, dependent words. You can think of all of these as being dependent words. These are all words that would put you in the same in the same trouble, basically. Can you see how if you were to start a sentence with any one of these words, it kind of gets you down that same road. It leads you into the same trouble, basically. So let's talk about how you work around that, how you put these words into your sentences properly so that you don't go down that wrong path. There's the original sentence, because. So basically, I need to finish this idea, okay? If I just walk into a room and say, guys, because it was raining, and I just leave it at that, you know there's a problem there, don't you? And that word because was basically setting us up for some more information, and that more information is missing right now. That's the problem, and that's why that sentence cannot remain as it is on its own. It's depending on something else, and the something else is not there. So how do I fix that? I added to it. Look at the sentence now. Because it was raining, we quickly ran into the house. Does that sound okay? It is. It's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that sentence. That's a great college level sentence. And look at that. I started a sentence with the word because, and nothing happened. The world did not explode, did it? So I encourage you to do that. I want you to try to use sentences like that. This is what's known as a complex sentence. When we were using the fanboys, remember we had two separate sentences and we were connecting them together using a comma and a fanboy. Those are called compound sentences. Compound basically means two parts. It means there's part A and there's part B, and I'm bringing them together with a fanboy and a comma before it, right? This is a complex sentence. So it's similar. There's still two parts, but it's complex because one part is depending on the other part, all right? So we talked about dependent clauses. Because it was raining was a dependent clause. That means the part I just now added, this part here, is an independent clause. Independent's the opposite of dependent. Independent, when you move out of your parents' house and you get your own apartment, you are now independent. You're paying your own bills and you're taking care of yourself. That's what that sentence is doing. Think of this. If I get rid of that, if I cross out the dependent clause and now we're just looking at the independent clause, can you see that that is a complete sentence? We quickly ran into the house. There's your subject. There's your verb, right? And it is a complete idea. It totally is. So an independent clause is another way of saying complete sentence, basically. So in order to use that word because at the beginning of a sentence, I basically had to add an independent clause to it so that it finishes the idea, and now it's a complete sentence. A complex sentence. Dependent clause followed by an independent clause. Okay, that's the first half of the lecture. We're already halfway through this. There's a really neat thing that you can do with sentences like this, okay? And this is where people run into the trouble with using the comma. Here's what I mean. Watch what I'm about to do. Zip, there. We quickly ran into the house because it was raining. There's the new sentence. Do you see the similarity? Up here, because it was raining, we quickly ran into the house. We quickly ran into the house because it was raining. What did I actually do here? I took those two clauses, the one on the left, the one on the right, and all I did was I reversed them. I took this one and moved it over here, and this one and moved it over here. And by doing that, I created a new sentence, but I haven't changed the meaning one bit. Meaning is exactly the same. It's just a different way of saying it. It's just stylistically different. And they're both correct, and they're both college level writing. Both are equally acceptable. All right? So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? You can take the same sentence and write it two different ways. One thing, other than the order of the clauses, one other thing changed. What is it? This little guy right here, that comma. The first one on top gets a comma, and the one on the bottom does not get the comma. And that's it. That's the difference. So, if you're going to be writing sentences like this, complex sentences, you're going to have to try to remember one of them gets a comma and one of them does not. How do you remember that? There's a couple ways of thinking about this. Me, I'm really good at hearing dependent words. As soon as I hear a word like because or although or since, I recognize that that's a dependent word. And as soon as I see that it's at the beginning of the sentence, as soon as I see that that dependent word is the first word of the sentence, I'm already saying there's a comma somewhere. There's going to be a comma at the end of the clause, separating the dependent clause from the independent clause. I'm looking for that. If I see that dependent word and it's in the middle of the sentence, then I'm relaxed. I know there's not going to be a comma there. It's not going to need one because that's the rule. Dependent independent gets the comma and independent dependent does not. That's one way of thinking it. If you're good at listening for that word, for those dependent words, maybe this would work for you. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't make sense to you. So here's another way that you can think about it. It's like a formula. Is it a DC-IC or an IC-DC? I know it sounds like the band, right? AC/DC. Dependent clause, independent clause. Independent clause, dependent clause. It's all about the order. If it starts with a dependent clause and ends with an independent clause, it's going to get the comma. Opposite of that, if it starts with an independent clause and ends with a dependent clause, there's nothing. Nothing goes there. And this is the one that gets misused so much. I see sentences like this all the time, and people want to put that comma there, but that does not get a comma, okay? So, a couple of ways of looking at it, basically. You can listen for the word, or you can just think of it as a formula. Again, there's some of those words, some examples of dependent words, words that you can start a sentence with that would give you a DC-IC. So, here's what I want from you guys. Back to the original slide. What I'd like is for you to do it. Just like we did before, where I had you come up with sentences and send them to me as a PDF file, I want you to do it again. Here's what I want. I want you to pick 5 of these words. Any 5, okay? And by the way, you don't have to use these. This is not a list of all of the dependent words. There's actually a lot of them out there. I just took a handful of them just to give you an idea what they look like. But if you want to work from this list, that's cool. If you want to go online and find some other dependent words, that's cool too. But I want you to find 5 different words and give me sentences using them. And you're going to write those sentences 2 different ways. One like this and one like that. So you're going to take the word, let's say before. You're going to make a DC-IC out of it. Then you're going to turn it into an IC-DC. And you're not going to change the sentence. You're not going to add words. You're not going to get rid of words. You're just going to change the order of those 2 halves, those 2 clauses. Okay? So for example, let me go through one with you. Let's take that word before. Okay, we're going to work with that. All right, so I got to come up with a DC-IC that starts with before. There it is. Before you go out, you better put a jacket on. That's a DC-IC, isn't it? There's my dependent word. So I know this is a DC, and I know this is an IC. And there's my comma because it's a DC-IC. Now, turn it into an IC-DC. Don't change any of the words. Just take those two clauses and reverse them. You better put a jacket on before you go out. I didn't change anything but the order of those two clauses. That's it. Notice I got rid of the comma. This is where people would want to put that comma, and you don't need it. It's unnecessary. So, give me a DC, give me an IC, a DC-IC, and an IC-DC. I'm confusing myself now. And I want you to give me, basically, that's a pair. I want you to give me 5 pairs, okay? So, 5 sets, 5 pairs of sentences. One's a DC-IC, one's an IC-DC. That's a pair. Give me 5 pairs using 5 different dependent words. You can work from the list that I gave you on this video, or you can find your own. Totally up to you.